Hi everyone, it's Anon once again. Today we'll talk about the Japanese weapons used during the war. During the First Sino-Japanese War, the Jeune École concept developed by the French was considered inadequate, so Japan turned to the UK and bought two Fuji-class battleships. These ships were a modified version of the famous British Royal Sovereign class battleships, but with two double-gun turrets with 305mm or 12-inch guns instead of 343mm guns on barbettes used by the British. Then they bought four more battleships based upon the British Majestic class, but with many improvements, making them superior to any British ship at the time. For example, the use of Belleville boilers instead of the standard cylindrical boilers made them at least 2 knots faster. The first 5 battleships used Harvey armor, but last, Mikasa, received Krupp armor, making it the most powerful, fast and best protected battleship in the world at the time. Atsuse and Shikishima had 3 funnels, the other 4 ships had 2. The Japanese followed the British doctrines and their main guns had a much higher rate of fire than the Russians. Because of this, many of the Japanese warships ran out of shells after a few hours of combat. Since Japan lacked industrial capacity to build large quantities of warships, they instead preferred to build less ships but of superior designs to overwhelm the enemy. This trend would continue until the mighty battleship Yamato in 1941. But we must not forget that the Japanese actually had a 7th battleship, the Black Ship of the Navy, the Qin Yan. This was in fact the Chinese ironclad Zhenyuan, captured during the First Sino-Japanese War. Although obsolete, it still saw combat during the Battle of the Yellow Sea and the Battle of Tsushima. During the First Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese discovered that their shells couldn't pierce the enemy ship's armor. Luckily for them, they used a brand new high-power explosive, known as Shimose, which was able to start major fires, allowing the destruction of the Chinese ships. Even with the new 305mm guns, they weren't sure if those guns could pierce the latest Krupp armor used by the Russians on many of their latest warships, so they developed a new type of shell, designed to explode in contact. The new explosives combined with the new shells could tear huge holes in the hull, destroying all fire mains and pumps, allowing the fire to destroy the ship. As a propellant, the Japanese used cordite, which produced a small quantity of smoke. It's also important to say that this new explosive and this new propellant were extremely unstable, leading, for example, to the loss of some of their own warships by accident, and could deteriorate over time, losing their properties. Another important factor was accuracy. During the Sino-Japanese War, the normal hit rate was only 4% at 2000 meters, and during the Russo-Japanese War, combat distance increased beyond 6000 meters. To increase their hit capacity, the Japanese ships used the latest technology in terms of rangefinders purchased from the UK. Russia had more difficulty in buying these advanced systems and used older and less capable versions of this device. To buy these capital ships, Japan was forced to spend as much as 50% of its budget on the armed forces, putting a lot of strain on the recently modernized and poor nation. This policy would continue until 1945. Comparing the two nations, Russia built a large number of different battleships with different guns, engines and armor. Japan, on the other hand, had a very similar ship designs, which had been test-proven by the British before purchased. Japan ordered 6 armored cruisers before the war. They were all armed with 4 203mm or 8-inch guns in 2 double-gun turrets and a powerful secondary battery. Around that time, Argentina cancelled an order of 2 Giuseppe Garibaldi armored cruisers from Italy, so Japan bought the ships instead. Kasuga was slightly different since it had a single forward 254mm gun. These 2 ships were constantly used by Japan as part of the main combat fleet, to replace the battleships Atsuse and Yashima lost in combat. Japan also had a large number of protected cruisers that were extremely important to locate enemy fleets and other support actions. The Matsushima protected cruisers that were the core of the combined fleet during the previous Sino-Japanese War continue to have lots of problems with their 320mm Kennet main gun, so they were mostly used for patrols and blockade operations. Ironically, these 3 ships were combined as reserves with the ironclad battleship Chinian, their main adversary during the previous war. The Japanese naval forces were commanded by Admiral Heihachiro Togo, quite possibly one of the luckiest men in the entire history. He was a former samurai, and after the Meiji Restoration he joined the navy, studying in England for many years before returning to Japan. He fought during the First Sino-Japanese War and commanded the cruiser Naniwa during the Battle of the Yellow River. It's really amazing to read about him because luck really followed him everywhere. Even his nomination to the command of the Combined Fleet is proof of that factor. When Emperor Meiji asked the Navy Minister why Togo was selected instead of other admirals, the reply was, "Oh, he's a man of good fortune." And indeed he was. Rear Admiral Dewa was also famous, commanding the cruiser squadron during the battles of Yellow Sea and Tsushima, while Rear Admiral Kamimura spent months looking for the Russian Vladivostok cruiser squadron, before participating at the Battle of Tsushima. The average Japanese soldier/sailor was either a volunteer or a conscript. All of them studied at least until the 4th grade in school, and during that time they were indoctrinated with stories of samurais, Bushido, love to their country and total devotion to the emperor. Most of the volunteers for the navy came from small coastal communities. They were accustomed to both to the sea and to the hard work. Since they were all literate, training was much easier and the best of them could even rise through the ranks if they studied further. Discipline was important, but the officers respected them. Battleship sailors were paid twice more than land soldiers, so for a family to have a son in the navy was a reason to be proud. Many of the officers were descendants of the old samurais, but they were also sons of merchants and bureaucrats. They studied for 4 years and were then sent on long overseas cruises or to study in foreign academies. Some of them were able to visit the United States during the Spanish-American War and saw the naval battles there, so they could compare it with the Battle of the Yellow River, giving them the advantage of perspective against the Russians. The Americans were able to blockade for some time the Spanish Navy at the port of Santiago, directly influencing the Japanese to do the same at Port Arthur. Also, the Japanese attachés were able to visit the sunken Spanish ships and took conclusions on the effects of the American shells. Naval training was strongly influenced by the British Nelson tradition, so it was expected from them to be audacious, bold and cunning. Weirdly, the best students of the academy were trained for a staff or a technical path, while the bottom half of their class at the academy went to the battleships. Completely the opposite view of the Russians. I wonder why. The ideas of mayhem were widely accepted in Japan, and his book was used as a textbook in the academy. The common Japanese soldier was armed with the Type 30 rifle, also known as the Arizaka. It was, like the Russian Mosin gun, a bolt-action rifle that used a 5-round clip and fired a 5mm round-nosed bullet that was underpowered. The gun itself was quite unreliable, since it suffered from a poorly designed locking mechanism that led to frequent jammings with the dust around Port Arthur. The Japanese also used a Hotchkiss machine gun, fed with 30-round strips of 5mm bullets, but since the Japanese were mostly on the offensive, they couldn't effectively use this heavy weapon in combat. The Hotchkiss also lacked a shield, so the operators were vulnerable. Army training was influenced by the French ideas, but after the crushing defeat of France during the Franco-Prussian War, Germany became the example to follow. Many Japanese observers were present during that war and learned with the conflict and the importance of the latest modern weapons. Food was also an important matter. Land soldiers didn't need to cultivate the land like the Russians did, since the emperor's government provided. The Japanese usually drank tea, which means that they needed to boil water first, unknowingly preventing the spread of cholera and other diseases. However, the Imperial Japanese Army suffered thousands of deaths to another disease, beriberi. The soldiers were fed with polished white rice, all you can eat, which was considered upper-class food. If they wanted vegetables or meat, they needed to pay extra. Since most soldiers wanted to send their money to their families, they survived on a daily diet of white rice and nothing else. However, white rice is only hydrocarbons, all the nutrients and vitamins have been removed. This led to an insufficiency of vitamin B12 and proteins. Lack of these vitamins produced vomits, swollen legs, followed by paralysis and finally death. The Japanese Navy made experiments before the war, led by Dr. Takaki Kanehiro, and mixed white rice with barley, therefore protecting sailors from this deadly disease. Amazingly, the army refused to change the meals of their soldiers, even after the Navy explained what they were doing wrong. As many as 25,000 men were sent home from the 80,000 men 3rd Army because of this disease during the war. Oddly, their prisoners were usually fed with barley, so they were better fed than the Japanese soldiers. Again, thank you so much for watching my videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe my YouTube channel and ring the bell to be notified of my new videos. For more info about my LEGO models, please visit my Flickr webpage. Thank you and see you next time.